Welcome to the Veritas Forum on Grit and Resilience during COVID-19, hosted by the Veritas Forum at USC. So we want to first thank our co-sponsors, USC's Price School of Public Policy, USC's Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. We'd also like to thank the various student groups at USC, UCLA, and Caltech who made the event possible. My name's Quincy. I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Southern California, and I have the pleasure of moderating tonight's discussion. So it is really a treat to have you all here. And as a student, I'm hopeful that my questions get right to the heart of what we feel we're sort of up against during COVID. Our goal together during this forum is going to be to answer the question of how to mentally approach work during COVID-19. And we're going to explore the expertise, experience, and worldviews of our two wonderful speakers as we discuss grit and resilience. So before I introduce them, I have to mention just one more thing, which is that we're going to be doing coffee chats after the forum. You can sign up through Slido by taking the poll there. And what that's going to entail is pairing up people from different worldviews to come together, meet over Zoom now, and maybe over a cup of coffee and discuss further the topics that were covered during this discourse, and just to get to make a friend outside of your little, maybe immediate circle that you've sort of been with during quarantine, because quarantine's sort of taken away our opportunity to meet people outside of our immediate family or our small group of friends that we really keep in touch with. So without any further hesitation, I'd love to introduce both of our terrific speakers. So you guys want to, there you are. Awesome. So Professor Carol Geffner is Professor of Practice and Government Management and the Policy Process and Director of the Executive Master of Leadership at USC's Price School of Public Policy. For undergrad students who might not be familiar with an Executive Master's, she teaches leaders. Her students are primarily executives in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. And she leads them through a program designed to develop self-aware leaders who have the capabilities to lead complex organizations. She also does research and focuses on the intersection of psychology, business, and leadership. She's an executive coach domestically and globally, and has helped to consult and guide organizations and executives through drastic change in multiple industries and very diverse industries: Taco Bell, Deutsche Bank, hospital systems, newspapers. So really a wealth of experience. She also founded and still consults for a national healthcare consulting firm, which helps to continue to improve healthcare in the face of major political, economic, and financial challenges. And before founding the healthcare firm, she was the chief learning officer and president, shared services for basically like a $2 billion integrated newspaper and media company where she provided executive leadership. She got her doctorate from Claremont Graduate University, specializing in adult learning and cognitive development, management and organization, and women in leadership. She got her MPA from the University of Southern California, right on, and a BA from the University of Toronto. She's a person of Jewish faith. So thank you for coming on, Carol. It's really a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's really
Awesome.
a delight.
Yeah. Next, we have former Lieutenant General Larry James. He's the Deputy Director at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where he oversees thousands of scientists and engineers. His leadership at JPL has included missions to Mars and interstellar space. Prior to JPL, Lieutenant General James was the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance at the Pentagon. He's responsible to the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Air Force for policy formulation, planning, evaluation, oversight, and leadership of Air Force intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, and led more than 20,000 intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance officers, enlisted ranks, and civilians. His 35-year military career included positions as a space shuttle payload specialist, GPS program manager, Titan IV launch director, those are rockets, commander of the 50th Space Wing at Schriever Air Force Base, was also the commander of the 14th Air Force at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and was director of the Signals Intelligence Systems Acquisition and Operations Directorate in Washington, D.C. He's also the director of Space Forces for Operation Iraqi Freedom at the Combined Air Operations Center in Saudi Arabia. Got his bachelor's from Air Force Academy and master's from MIT. He's a person of Christian faith and a fan of The Martian, starring Matt Damon. Really a pleasure to have you on as well. And as you can tell, we have some very distinguished guests. So we are collectively, as an audience and as a moderator, very thankful for you both for coming. So thank you.
Thank you, Quincy.
It was also a pleasant surprise for me to find in my research about our speakers that both of them at one time, or still continually, have held board positions for the United Way, which serves the homeless communities. So also very wonderful thing. So Yeah, with that, I'd love to get straight into it and just begin asking what a workday has looked like for you in the past couple of weeks, and if there's anything that's been particularly challenging about working since COVID has really taken a hold on our country.
Hey, Quincy, well, I'll start off. I think you were going to head this way, but certainly it hasn't been the past couple of weeks. It's been the last 7 weeks for us that we've been working from home since that started with stay safe at home. And certainly it creates a whole new rhythm in your life. I think that's kind of one of the challenges that you have to deal with, that even though my schedule is still similar in terms of meetings and events that are covered online now, number one, you're not commuting. Number two, you're sitting in your office or in the kitchen. And my wife is also at home, so there's things going on around. And I've heard a lot of people talk about Zoom fatigue, where you're often just going from one online meeting to another. And frankly, it takes a lot more concentration to really focus on a meeting online versus, sitting around a table and talking and discussing where the interplay goes back and forth. So I think those are some of the challenges, but you figure out how to make it work.
So let me jump in on that. I think Larry and I both probably have very similar days. This question prompted me to write down what a typical day looks like. So probably like everybody listening, it starts off with Zoom. When I can't sit anymore or when I set a timer, I'll get up and play ball with my dog. Then it's back to Zoom. Then I might get on the ground and do like 15 or 20 push-ups or sit-ups. Then it's back to Zoom, etc. I won't take you all the way through till the evening. Ultimately, what I also do is try to wind down the day with a neighbor with a very long walk. I fit in weights during the day in between Zoom calls. And Larry mentioned about Zoom fatigue. There's actually studies that are being now published about how Zoom taxes our brain differently. So it's a real thing. Also, the lack of boundaries. I'm not experiencing that in a severe way, but many people, particularly when the spouse is home and children are home, there's a lack of boundaries. So I do my best to create some, with playing with my dog and exercise.
Awesome.
I think just to jump on that too, Quincy, to her point, you have to figure out how to ease your mind during this day. For me personally, I start out the morning exercising, so I feel like I've done that, but then you got to get out. I'll take my laptop out on the porch when it's nice and just do my work from there occasionally. At the end of the day, just like Carol, we'll take a walk in the neighborhood. And so you kind of have to just make sure there's time, as I call it, time for play in the middle of your day. Otherwise, you just get consumed by this stuff.
Yeah. And I guess following from that, I've been talking to a lot of students, and I suppose to get into a little bit how this might have affected some students and their day-to-day, job is oftentimes studying and that sort of thing, but a lot of their plan also is to build up a resume or build up towards some sort of a career dream. But a lot of that seems to have stalled. Others are working, but have had to make really drastic changes to the way that they do things. So with a lot of sort of tangible challenges that we can see, it's kind of become, I think, apparent to a lot of people that they're feeling a little bit mentally off. Like they're almost maybe like feeling a little bit like mentally adrift, or something is just a little bit weird. Some people have almost felt lethargic and that sort of thing. So is there anything that you think are the most immediate challenges to people's mental approach to work when they encounter uncertainty, like to this degree?
Yes. So let me jump on that one and talk about how our brain functions a little bit. First of all, if we were in person, I would ask everybody to raise their hand if you're feeling, if you tend to feel anxious, frustrated, angry, depressed, and I would continue that list, and I bet every hand in the room would go up. Let's just take a look at a few basic facts. Our brains don't know the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. So if you're feeling the anxiety around the uncertainty, for instance, your brain doesn't understand that that's anxiety. It's going to react. It's going to light up the same way as if you were being hurt. Your brain, the pictures you have in your brain, what you imagine is real. So the brain doesn't know any difference if you're picturing yourself lying on a beach and relaxing, or if you're picturing yourself freaking out because you just lost your job and you're sitting and wondering, now what am I going to do with my life? And you have all these pictures going through your head. The brain doesn't know the difference. And lastly, just for this, your brain actually feels the same emotions as someone else you care about. So let's say you're in a house with a spouse or a partner, and that person is also going through uncertainties and stress. Your brain can't decipher whether it's you or that person. So all of this is to say, when we as humans go through drastic uncertainty, or if uncertainties that feels significant to you, or anxiety or stress, there's a real process that's happening physiologically. So it's important to recognize that this is normal. Now, the follow-on question, and I don't know if Quincy wants me to jump there yet, is so what do you do about it? So
we'll get there just in a little bit.
Let me hold that, but the main message is that in times of uncertainty, your brain, what happens here is everything feels unfamiliar, and our brains don't like unfamiliar, they like familiar. So when Quincy mentioned that sometimes we feel off, it's because it's a different sensation going through your day than what you're neurologically what you're used to. Let me just stop there and see what Larry has to say about this question.
Yeah, because this has certainly been a challenge. As we've got essentially 6,000 people working off lab now, teleworking in a whole new environment. And so how do you give them the tools to cope? And I think to Carol's point, first is just recognizing, and I saw a great article in Harvard Business Review that I sent out to our management, says you've got, emotional stress, economic stress, and something they called inertia, where it's like, I feel like I'm just sitting here and I can't make progress, and you have to combat against that. And you have to recognize that certainly in your employees or in the students that, you have to actively say, okay, economic stress, emotional stress, inertia, how do I take actions, to Carol's point, of dealing with that? And, personally for me, it's very real because my daughter, who's 33 and a software coder in New York City, was laid off by the startup that she works for. So now she's in the middle of all the COVID stuff. She can't go out of her apartment hardly. She doesn't have a job. And now she's anxious and she's trying to find work. And so it becomes real when, someone close to you has to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose maybe to ask, to follow up with Carol a little bit on that, you mentioned that when you're facing uncertainty, but uncertainty of this degree seems, at least to a lot of people, like it's different. I guess both of you might be able to speak to this. Do you think that's true? Do you think this uncertainty is representative of other uncertainties in life? Or do you think that COVID sort of represents something that might be totally different for people to deal with? Because it seems like everything is kind of crashing down for people who maybe have planned out all of these things.
Sure. So, all right, I'll jump in. This is a Zoom phenomena. We can't look at each other and read our signals. So I'll jump in and take a shot at that. First of all, for many of you listening, particularly those of you who are centennials or Gen Z, which many of you are, or millennials, you have not been in a situation likely that feels like prolonged uncertainty. We've all been through times that are short where you don't know what's next. You're going from high school to college and so on. But none of you likely have gone through something that's months and months and you don't see an end in sight. So in that regard, it is new. I feel the same way. We don't know where this is going. That's the novel, excuse me for making a pun, the novel dimension of this. What that means that we have to pay even more attention to how we create boundaries, some structure, some goals in the short run, smaller, tighter, and not spend as much time looking at the long run, like where am I going to be 5 years from now? Because you can't necessarily pull all those levers right now. So I'll stop with the suggestions. I know you're not ready for that yet. Larry.
Definitely along the same lines. I think structure is important, you know, just the daily structure and the weekly structure, because, you know, you can get in the mode where, okay, I get up and I leave my pajamas on and I hang out and I watch movies, and suddenly you have no structure in your life. And we've all understood that structure is very important. And so having the structure, having those short time goals, and then doing something you feel is important. Again, that's something we emphasize with our folks, is that the work you're doing continues to be important. You may be in a different environment, you may be doing in a whole different way of working. And even for students and those whose classes are kind of weird right now, and you know, the future may be a little weird, I think I want to focus on something that's important that I can do in this period of time, and give myself some structure that will allow me to feel like that was good. I did something today or this week that I met my goal today.
Awesome. All right, so I'd love to move a little bit into the buzzwords for our discourse tonight, which are grit and resilience. So the question, I guess, is could you briefly, maybe, or maybe not briefly, explain what these terms have meant for you in your experience as leaders, and Carol as a coach of leaders and a professor of leaders, and Larry also as a leader of many leaders and also engineers and scientists. Maybe let's go to Larry first this time.
Sure. You read a lot of definitions of what that really means. I think there's a couple of great words. One is perseverance. One is overcoming. One is continuing on. I think all those kind of define grit, because you will always find situations in life which you're not necessarily prepared for. And you sent us a link to a great study of West Point cadets, and having been a cadet at the Air Force Academy, I mean, part of it was just saying, I'm going to make it through this. You know, you may not be the strongest person, you may not be the smartest person. And those that didn't have that grit, if you will, often stopped and said, I'm not doing this. So part of it is just saying, I am going to make it through whatever is ahead of me. And as you do those things and you look back, you recognize that I could make it through that. And that encourages you to make it through the next thing. So I'll stop there and let Carol maybe amplify.
Well, I 100% agree with Larry. And I'll just add a few additional pieces of information. Grit is, yes, formally defined as perseverance. So Larry said it very clearly. And it's perseverance also focused on the long term. So look, when you're young, this is an unfair part of life. When you're young, you cannot see the long runway ahead of you. When you're 20, you can't imagine what life is going to be when you're 40 or 50. And one of the problems that young people face is you want so hard to create a career, right? And then something like this happens and it feels like the train is stuck on the tracks. Perseverance comes into play when you keep imagining you are going to have a career, you are going to have a profession, and guess what? This is only one time of many in which your profession is going to go in a completely different direction than you anticipated. One of the things that I'm doing research on right now are prominent women leaders who are in male-dominated professions and organizations. And in addition to all of the other leaders I work with, one by one, these women who are now mostly between 50 and their 60s have unfolded their stories, and every single one has said, I am not here where I thought I was going to be when I was in college, except for one rocket scientist. That she was the exception. So that's, and I will share that when I graduated college, University of Toronto, I came to San Diego, and we were in a recession. I was out of work for 8 months. I ended up going on unemployment insurance. So I wasn't much different, and I had no idea how I was going to pay my bills. And then I became a waitress. So the issues here are, one, reminding yourself you've got the goods. You wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't. You are ahead of the game. You're in college, or you've graduated college or grad school. So, and you've got all kinds of capabilities. So you might not have, I know centennials don't like to hear this, you might not be able to get your dream internship or your dream job in the next 6 months, but you've got a long runway. Now, resilience is different. Resilience is about adaptability. It's taking the good with the bad, and it's adapting to changing circumstances. So while they're different, you're actually practicing them both now. Even though I can't see you, I know that because you're on Zoom right now, so you've already adapted. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. And Larry, I want to go back to something you said really quickly. For anybody who is sort of inexperienced in grit, it might be useful to explore, like, how does somebody begin or take that first step? What are the things that are important? Because from somebody who hasn't done it before, it might sound like, okay, well, you're the deputy director of JPL, you know, you've done all this stuff, you landed stuff on Mars, but I don't have any experience yet. So could you speak a little bit to how you begin to start doing that? How you personally began to have grit, something like that?
Yeah, I think it does come back to somewhat what we talked about, is just having those short-term goals that say, I will get through this. Going back to my undergrad days of, the first thing we had to do at the Air Force Academy was the basic training. And, every day was something challenging, something new, something different, and you didn't know what was going to be thrown at you. So you kind of just learned to say, okay, I will get through this day. And then you were successful that day and you say, okay, I did that. Now I will set my goal for the next day. So I think it really is starting with small steps to say, okay, I'm going to get through this task, or I'm going to get through this class, or I'm going to get through whatever it is. And over time, you realize that, number one, I can do it. So that kind of defines the perseverance and the grit. But I think to Carol's point, it starts to show you that I do have some resilience. They threw this at me, whatever happened, and I was able to handle it. And that just builds upon itself and gives you the self-confidence, I think, to really respond and have the resilience to handle the things that life throws at you.
Let me piggyback on Larry's comments. Larry, you said something that's really essential. You said you do something, you do a task, and then you say, yeah, I can do that. That's the piece that I hope everybody can hear who's listening tonight. Because what we often do is we do a little task and then we say, oh, that was nothing. Or, well, that's not my dream job. Or, well, I got rejected from this. The important part is that with every step that you take a moment, or you have someone tell you, someone you trust tell you, you know what? You just did that. And kudos. So you got to celebrate the small wins. And that's a lifetime lesson, because gosh only knows, when you're, I'll say as old as I am, you fall down a lot and you get rejected from all kinds of things in life. And it's really important to build the muscle now. You're building it. Some of you already have an advanced degree in grit or resilience if you've come from homes where there was trauma, or in your formative years somewhere there was trauma. Research does show that young people who go through trauma tend to develop resilience and or grit earlier on in life. So some of you already have the muscle. Now's the time to use it. Now, another way of, this is going to sound very commonsensical, but you got to put one foot in front of another. That sounds silly, but the way you develop grit is you move, you take action. The thing that gets in the way is our heads. If you could take a small action every day and check it off, and your head wasn't your enemy, you would feel better about yourself. So I don't want to go into I could get on a soapbox right now about what we do in our heads that actually hold us back. They're the biggest barriers. So yeah, it's the small things, it's the small steps, it's the celebration, it's the acknowledgement, and building support around you with people who say, look what you're doing.
Carol, if you want to briefly go into how we do that to ourselves, I think that could actually be really useful for some of our students who are feeling sort of lethargic or like they're stuck.
Sure.
Just because I think sort of like when you go to the doctor, right? Your leg hurts, but having an X-ray is in some sense comforting because you know what you're up against.
That's right.
I think if you would be willing to go quickly into that and discuss
Sure.
that, I'd love that.
Sure. And any one of your listeners who has been through a chronic illness understands what you just said, because oftentimes with chronic illnesses, we don't know where it's going. We just have to learn to live with it. And that's kind of what we're facing right now. We need to learn to live with it. So this thing on our shoulders, it can be really helpful. The problem is we tend to have a negative bias. So what that really means is something happens in your life, like your internship gets canceled. And the monologue that's running oftentimes is negative. I'm never going to get another one. That was my best one. That's what I wanted, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like a runaway train. And that's what our brains do. Our brains are made to think. And all of you listening are in college or you've graduated college. So you're really good thinkers. And what needs to happen is that same brain needs to interrupt itself by going over and over some other affirmations, like, as Larry said, I can do this. Like, it's only one day. Like, today I'm having a bad day. Well, tomorrow's going to be a better day. So we can actually use realistic, honest affirmations. We also can use our bodies. So when your brain is running away with you with negative thoughts, that is causing stress in your body. Problem is you can't feel it, but it's happening. So another way to intervene is by using your physical self to release the stress. So when you're having a problem with your head, go out and take a walk. Go take a run. Walk around your backyard 5 times. Move. It will interrupt that runaway train. I could also talk about emotionally what we should do. To be brief, let me just say that there's a ton of research on gratitude. So when you have runaway negative thoughts, one of the things I would suggest to you is that you either start keeping a daily gratitude journal or you start mouthing out loud. By the way, when I walk my dog in the morning, it's a mindfulness walk. And what I really do when there's nobody around, I will say things to my dog, because of course he understands English. Look at that beautiful tree. Oh my gosh, look at that bird. Oh, I love this flower because there's been all this rain. If you listen to Varun Sony's Veritas Forum that preceded us a few months ago, if you listen to him, he said a lot of grateful comments. I'm grateful for being here. I'm grateful for you. Gratitude actually has a correlate with our brains. So I would urge you to start practicing gratitude every day, all day, with the little things like I'm grateful for being here. I'm grateful for meeting you, etc. It's that specific.
Thanks. Okay, Larry, I want to go to you with this next question to begin. And in one of our previous discussions, you said something I thought was particularly awesome. You said one of your mantras is to thrive in chaos, which I thought sounded like so cool. So for students, or I guess maybe not even for students, but in your experience as a leader of scientists and engineers and in uncertainty. And I guess, Carol, this is really appropriate for you as well, as being somebody who's consulted in the face of big change, Affordable Care Act, with the healthcare and other things like that. How have you motivated your, or what strategies have you undertaken to encourage the adoption of characteristics of grit and resilience in your, I suppose, subordinates, or in your workers, or in your ranks?
Well, again, part of it is just teaching. Again, like I said, this kind of goes off into a little bit of a path, but, I think we all have to be lifelong learners. And, I'm constantly trying to read different, articles and books, and then apply that or send that down to the various management levels. And so, as I said, I've sent multiple articles down to the managers that says, here's how you deal with working at home. Here's how you deal with emotional stress. And so I think at this level, it's about teaching and then modeling. People look to leaders, frankly, as a model. And you don't really know, you could even just be a leader in a class, but people look to you to set the tone and to set the tenor of a group, an organization, or whatever. So part of it is teaching and constantly learning, and then filtering that down to those that are under, that work for you and with you. But the other component is modeling. And I think that's so important, because you've probably, I'm sure, Quincy, you've never had a bad instructor, right? So, but my point is, you can think about, that was a great instructor, that was a great professor. Ooh, that was not such a great professor, and I don't want to be like that person. So modeling and teaching, I think, is extremely important. And the modeling is just keep your head on straight, be calm, don't fly off the handle in these types of environments, be thoughtful of others, take others into consideration when you're making decisions. All those things permeate as a leader. So those are teaching and modeling, I think, are two key components of how you get this down into the organization.
First of all, yes, yes, and yes. Thank you, Larry. Modeling, modeling, modeling. And look, for those of you who are listening, some of you will go into large organizations, and you will at some point in time move through various jobs and ultimately manage, and then maybe go into executive roles. Others of you want to start a business, be an entrepreneur. It doesn't matter your path. If you want people to follow you, you have to be a leader. Otherwise, you turn around and there's nobody there. So, which happens a lot, because you've all probably worked for both good and bad leaders. So if you, as a leader, in addition to role modeling, and boy, is that ever critical, a little rabbit trail here. One of my best bosses took me aside one day. I was an executive, and so a lot of people, would watch what I do and say. And he called me back in his office, and he said, Carol, when you leave my office, I want you to make sure you take a breath before you leave my office, and you walk out with a calm demeanor, because people will read your face. And if you have even the slightest look of anxiety, they're going to interpret that to mean the business is going down. So just a personal story. In addition to what Larry said, I would do this. You have to start off by recognizing your employees are all different. So some of them have strengths. Some of them are better off when they're in structured and highly structured environments. They're going to wrestle at a time like this, because there's so much change and uncertainty. Other people love the flexibility, and they have a harder time when everything is regimented. So as a leader, it's really important to call out a person's strengths. And in chaos, the best of you and the worst of you is going to show up. So it's really important not to just go for, well, you're not doing this and you're not flexible, but you got to go the other direction and see what you can do to help the person and support them through change. Change is rough for everybody. It's just a matter of degree. So here's another tactic. Ask questions. If you have someone working for you, I hope you're asking regularly, what can I do to help you? How are you feeling? What's going on with you? Because now that we're in Zoom, we all know that people have these lives behind us, and a lot of them are stressful, right? With little kids, sick parents, etc. And if something is really important and you want to help someone because they're blowing out, they're really not responding in a productive way or acting in a productive way, give them feedback close to an event. So if you have an employee who's just walking around angry or dour, don't let it go on for weeks. Pull the person aside privately and say, let me just share something I'm seeing. I don't know what's going on, but let's talk about it. Those are some little steps that you can take.
So for students who don't yet find themselves in those leadership positions, should they be searching for people who are doing this? Like how should students engage with people that would provide that sort of a model that could be an encouragement during sort of adversity or uncertainty like we're experiencing now?
So I'll take this one first and then turn it to Larry. It's really, really important at a time when there's a lot of feelings that can be negative, right? It's really important to build people in your life who have optimism, who are fun, who are likable, whom you trust. You don't have to be a formal authority figure. It is critical at a time like this because there's this thing called social contagion. And what that means is if I'm with you and we're hanging out and much of the time I'm just going, wah, 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 and I can't stand this and I'm just complaining much of the time, it makes it much harder for you to remain calm, to see the positive, to enjoy your day. So it's what you can do as a student, as a young person, is reach out to your friends who are helpful and supportive, your family, your neighbor. I have a neighbor I walk with and I love her to pieces, but she tends to be kind of dark. And so what I do, because we're spending a lot of time together, is I make sure I have a happy hour with a couple of other friends during the week. I'm doing some phone calls that I don't usually do because you need to bolster your spirit.
And to be honest, I would just literally echo that. I mean, find the folks in your life. They don't have to be a leader. They don't have to be a professor, but find the folks in your life who have that attitude. And personally, as I look at folks that we're bringing up to be leaders and managers, that's one of the characteristics we look for is what is your view in terms of optimism or pessimism? Because those who have a positive view and those who inculcate that into the folks that work around them and with them and for them, they're dramatically more powerful in terms of operating the organization. So you want to build that worldview in your head, frankly, right now, that I'm going to be optimistic about this. And I realize that, we all have a natural disposition and, some of us are more optimistic than others. My wife is always saying, you can always find a patch of blue sky. And so that's just my natural tendency. But cultivate that in yourself and find people who you can hang out with, whether it's on Zoom or whether you're walking with friends in the neighborhood or whatever, or family that help you maintain that attitude. Very important.
Thanks. So I want to move us a little bit towards worldviews. There's a beloved professor of philosophy at USC, Dallas Willard, who said, you cannot opt out of having a worldview. You can only try to have one that most accords with reality, including the whole realm of facts concerning what is genuinely good. So with that in mind, where do you see your worldviews playing into your views of grit and resilience or your experience as a leader in uncertainty? I guess, Larry, let's go with you on this one.
Sure. Well, Dallas Willard is a great person, so glad you quoted him. Yeah, I mean, so as you said, Quincy, at the start, I am a Christian. I come from a Christian background, and that really gives you a particular worldview. And certainly, I think in any time of life, and certainly in times of change or in times of stress that we're in, I think that gives you an anchor to hold on to. Kind of one of my life verses from the Bible, Paul wrote a letter to the Romans, and where he said, we know that all things work together for good for those who know him and are called according to his purposes. And so that gives you an anchor to hold on to. Yeah, things aren't always going to be perfect, and there's always going to be challenges and bad things that happen. But ultimately, especially when you're old as I am, and you look back, you can see that, wow, I didn't get that job that I really wanted or that position, but this worked out incredibly well. And so you have to, number one, have an anchor to hold on to. And I like Carol's comment. You know, I try to start every day with prayer and meditation, and that just centers you. And part of that is just thankfulness, you know, recognizing that, as Carol said, you know, for the students, hey, you're at a great university, you've got a great future ahead of you. Yes, you can't see the next 2 or 3 months, but be thankful for the things that you do have. And when you start your day, for me, in prayer and meditation, with that anchor of knowing that things are going to work together for good, that centers you in a way that I think allows you to go through the tumult and the chaos and all those things.
I think this question is wonderful. Actually, it tasked me. I've spent a lot of time over the past week thinking about this and wrestling with ways of framing the answer. So I've come to 2 simple frames. One is, yes, I am Jewish, and so my familiarity is fundamentally with a Judeo-Christian set of beliefs. I'm also spiritual, and that's developed over many, many years. So I have the sense that, first of all life is precious, all life, not just human life, and that we're all connected. So, you know, I was raised in a family where giving back and charity was really, really important. And so I saw that amidst a lot of other things that weren't so good, but I saw that. And that's also part of a Judeo-Christian belief system. And so how that plays out at a time like this is I think every day about who can I help and how am I helping anybody? And is there something I can do to help more? And even if it's little, you know, like calling a friend and saying, are you okay? That giving back is part of a worldview for me, because it reminds me always that we are connected with one another, and that's fundamental. I also took a piece of a quote from Rabbi Eli Spitz, who's a rabbi here in Tustin, just an amazing thinker and writer. And this is only a tiny portion of what he said, but I love this. He said, our lives are fleeting, our knowledge is limited, and yet we have the power to improve the world. And that speaks to my worldview, because I didn't realize this in my 20s, 30s, or even 40s. You know, I always ask, why am I doing this work, and does it matter? And what I came to years later was, I do the work I do, whatever it is, whether I'm in a newspaper company or at USC, I do it to try to improve the quality of life, even if it's for a person. So that's very tied to my belief system. And I would say to you, all of you young people, worry not about whether you have an established worldview, because it changes, right? And who you are at 19 and how you think will evolve very, very much, you know, by the time you're 20, 30, 40, 50. So there you go.
So Larry, I want to follow up with your comment on that. Just in that people might hear that and then think about how this measure of faith in that things are going to work out is one thing, but then going out and doing all this work and working your butt off to make something happen is another. So could you talk a little bit about how those things sort of fit together for you personally, as somebody who works with a ton of very highly motivated people and a high achieving organization, but then still have this like believe that faith is an integral part of how it all works out?
Yeah, I think just because you have faith doesn't mean you don't put your heart and soul into what you're doing. Another great verse is, whatever you do, work with all your heart, not just for your human masters. And so I think we all are called to give our very best. Faith doesn't mean, well, I can just sit back and good things are going to happen to me. You know, we're called to do our very best and show our very best but the faith comes in to recognize that I think I don't always control my future. In fact, I don't really control my future in many ways, but in my faith, there's someone who does. And I can rest in that and recognize that I will do my best. I will seek to be the best person I can and the best witness of that faith as I can. And then we will move forward and accept what happens. You know, it doesn't mean you don't try to change things, but you understand that you may do your very best here and suddenly you get a curveball. That's just life. And then that faith gives you the strength to go, okay, we'll go to this next thing. I hope that helps illuminate that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to move a little bit towards sort of another, maybe something that listeners are thinking about now is, it sounds like we're tasked by the experts with going out and doing. So where, and you talked a little bit about it both in your personal rituals, a little bit about rest or getting yourself prepared sort of for the day. So having grit, having resilience is sort of like, sounds like it's getting up and doing something, but then rest is sort of taking a pause. So how are students supposed to balance those right now, where it seems as if they have an opportunity for rest, but then at the same time, they still have the schoolwork to do, or maybe they see them, they feel pressure to build something or make something right now. So where is there sort of like a sweet spot there? Carol, let's start with you.
So I would say that there's not a recipe, right? So I would not suggest that there's a sweet spot for everybody, but this is a critical topic. So first of all, think about it this way. If you're trying to build resilience in your life, that means you can adapt, you can flex, you can move. The more stressed you are, the less flexible you are. So when you talk about rest, and I would add to that anything like meditation, walking, just breathing, which is all, these are all aspects of rest. This is essential for your well-being, and your well-being is a long-term game. So yes, you know, everybody listening tonight, I'm going to make a big assumption that you are going to good schools or you've gone to good schools. So y'all are achievers. Whether you're achieving at the level you want or not is a different conversation. You might not be as good at taking care of yourselves mentally and emotionally. And rest, and you can go Google all the science around sleep, but rest is a way for your body to regroup, get energy, and be more focused. Your brain gets tired, uses a lot of energy. So mostly I would say that you need to give yourself permission, right? So we can talk till as they say, till the cows come home. But mostly you need to give yourself permission that it's okay to take 30 minutes out, because then you're going back and you're putting 30 minutes in or an hour in. It's a zero-sum game. If all you're doing is working to achieve an end result, you're actually working against yourself.
And I would just maybe amplify that a little bit, Quincy. I mean, just a life story, you know, in the Air Force, you get 30 days of vacation a year. And there were many people who took pride in not taking all their vacation because they felt that that makes me look like I'm working really hard and I'm doing really good things. The reality was I always made sure I took my 30 days of vacation every year because, as Carol said, it's just so important that you get that time away, you get that time with friends or family and just to rest and relax and put all this other stuff behind you. And then you come back much more effective. And then you can indeed continue to do everything heartily as unto the Lord, you know. So I think those are the things that you have to take into account. And you know, there is life balance. At JPL, we tell all of our new employees, I greet all of our new employees and I say, one of the important things here at this lab is work-life balance. We want to make sure that you have time to spend with your friends, your family, your significant others, and time to enjoy the things that are all around us here in Pasadena. You're going to work hard when you're here, but we want to make sure you have that time to rest, recharge, and come back even better. So even as students, you have to work on that, study life balance, work life balance, and make sure you're paying attention to that.
Quincy, can I add to Larry's comments for a moment? Remember that every day you have an opportunity to build up your bank account, your emotional reserve. So in addition, right now, none of us are planning the grand vacations we were hoping for. That's for sure. And we're at home a lot. Hopefully you're at home a lot, everybody. So you have the best opportunity right now, actually better than if you were in a formal job somewhere, to take 5-minute breaks. You are better off to work for an hour, 45 minutes, an hour and a half, and take a 5-minute stretch break or lie down. I do frequently, because I practice meditation, frequently I'll do a 6-minute, I'll go to an app that I have, and I'll do a 6 or 7-minute meditation, because I can feel myself getting tired being on Zoom all the time, and I can feel myself just wearing down. So before I get there, I will get on the floor, actually with my dog, and do a little rest break. So I'm urging you to see the opportunity you have. Oftentimes, once you get into that formal job setting, you can't go shut the door and lie on the floor. So you can go to your car and take a 5-minute break, but that's about it.
So one more thing on that. Actually, before I go to that, I just want to invite our audience again to go to the Slido site and upvote the questions that you'd most like to be seen in the Q&A, just so that we get the best questions that the most people want to be answered. But before we're going to do one last question, then we'll go to Q&A. Wondering from both of you what you think. So there's another professor, Warren Bennis, at USC, who's a great student of leadership and a prolific writer, and sort of wrote the book on leadership, I guess you could say. He advised people like JFK, Ronald Reagan, and tons of executives in the corporate world, public world, whatever. He said, basically, humble leaders do not debase themselves, neither falsely nor due to low self-esteem. They simply recognize all people as equal in value and know that their position does not make them a god. So my question for both of you, I suppose, is how, when students begin to exemplify these traits of grit and resilience and making that step, how does humility fit into that? Because that seems like that could be a challenge, in that some people might struggle with the pride of sort of becoming this resilient, up from the ashes type of success story. Especially because we have a lot of students on the call who have big plans for the future and that sort of thing. So yeah, Larry, we'll start with you.
Sure. I just like the term servant leadership. I think, it goes back to the comments I think both Carol and I made, that you look at everyone, as you're no better than they are in one sense. We're all humans. We're all trying to do our best, and to try and set ourselves above another just frankly leads to problems. And so I think it comes from that humility of recognizing that, we're all starting from the same place, but you want to do your best, but it comes back to being humble about who you are, being humble about those around you. That doesn't stop you from taking on a tough task, taking on a tough assignment. It doesn't stop you from doing any of those things, but you do it in a way that you're not putting people down, you're not stepping on them trying to get ahead. You're recognizing that we all have value, and you just want to have that heart that just recognizes that I'm here to serve this organization, this student community, in order to make the world better at the end of the day. Ultimately, that's a great objective we can all have. One of the things, one of our kind of mottos at JPL is dare mighty things. We all want to dare mighty things, but we can do it with a spirit of inclusiveness, bringing people along, but still doing our best and taking on the tough assignments and so on. It's just, how do you approach it versus, you can still do well, but you can still be humble. It's kind of a rambling answer, but that's where you are.
Okay.
It's not rambling at all. It's spot on. Quoting Jim Collins from Stanford, who a lot of you have heard of the book Good to Great, when he did a study about organizations and leaders that were high performing. In other words, they really had the metrics, so they were outperforming their peers. And one of the primary traits that he discovered in that research was that those kinds of leaders had a deep, deep sense of humility, just as Larry is mentioning. So, it's a trap. This is a very important topic. I only wish we had lots of time for it. There's a trap as we become more and more achievement oriented and more successful, and we take on bigger and bigger titles. There's a lot of research that's been done on narcissism, and unfortunately, many of your listeners have either worked for or will work for really narcissistic leaders who don't understand humility and don't practice humility. At the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, do you want people to work with you or don't you? It's that simple. You want people to respect you or don't you? Do you want people to follow you or don't you? And humility is a human trait that I believe we need to cultivate for our entire lives. It is an attractor. It speaks to your humanity, and those who are not practicers, there's no word like that. This is my PhD speaking. Those who don't practice humility tend to drive people away. As Larry knows from the military, they will often get people to comply with their orders or their direction, and then as soon as people can run away from them, they do. So I think between Larry and myself, we could spend another hour just talking about this question. It's a rich one, and I would urge the listeners to take a look at Bennis's work, take a look at Jim Collins' work, in addition to the faith-based work that's been done on humility.
If I could just add one more short comment, though, real quick, but I go back to kind of starting every day with prayer and meditation and thankfulness. You look at for me personally, what has gone on in my life, first kid in his family to go to college, came from a rural community in Appalachia, all these things, you look back and say, wow, I have to be thankful for that, because in reality, it wasn't anything I did in many ways. It was the abilities that were given to me and that I try to make use of. And so when you have that spirit of thankfulness and recognition that, I didn't necessarily do all this on my own. Yeah, I worked hard and I did all these things, but it kind of creates this humility in you when you look back and you have this spirit of thankfulness for the things that have been given to you. And so that's one method that every day I try to use to recognize that, humility is important. And, I wasn't God's gift to the world when I came into it. So, so anyway, I'll shut up now.
No, that's okay. I actually have I have one final question before we go to Q&A, and it's for both of you. And Larry, we'll continue with you. As you are now, what is the most stark difference in your views of grit and resilience as compared to your younger self? Can you think of something that has changed in your opinion of how to be resilient, how to have grit? If not, that's okay. But would love to explore sort of what has changed in your understanding of those two things as you've grown and experienced more and more responsibility.
Yeah. I think it's more not necessarily understanding, but the practice of. I go back to what we said early on. Early on, it's like, okay, let me get through this day. Let me get through this task. I think as you go into higher levels of leadership, it's, your grit and resilience is more about longer term goals and objectives that you have to have the resilience and the grit to just stay on the path and get there. It may take 2 years, it may take 1.5 years, because now you're trying to make a difference in larger and larger organizations. So I think it's more perspective versus understanding of what grit and resilience are. I think it's still the same traits, but now the focus is different in terms of where you're trying to go and how you're trying to do it.
Carol?
Sure. I would say the biggest difference between my earlier years, you know, teens, 20s, 30s, is that I wasn't aware of grit and resilience. First of all, the literature wasn't robust. And I just thought, as Larry said, you get up every day and you do your work, and sometimes you're miserable, sometimes you're happy, you just do. You just, you know, baby boomers, this was part of the baby boomer era. We didn't have a lot of choices. You just did what you did. Now, I'm not only very aware of the literature, and it's so abundant. I mean, you can go on, listen to YouTube videos. It's just, it's ubiquitous. So not only that, but more importantly, I'm aware of myself. I've spent really a lifetime developing deep, deep, deep self-awareness over many, many, many years. So I'm aware of not only how important grit and resilience is because I study it, because I work with leaders for the last 30 years. So I've learned from them, but I've learned that for myself, if I want to live a long and fruitful life and a happy life, I need to keep practicing those muscles. Those are part of it. I practice other muscles too, like optimism, gratefulness, etc. But it's not easy, as they say. Getting old is not for the faint of heart. And so I practice the muscle every day.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to move a little bit to the Q&A now. So the first question I'm seeing is that somebody wrote, I feel that I have less time now and I'm being pulled in many different directions. I have school and family situation and extra time. Any advice? I know I need to focus.
So a couple of pieces of advice. This first one you may not like, but if you go on, if you look up grit, Angela Duckworth at Penn was the person who developed the term grit, and she has a grit scale on her website, angeladuckworth.com, and you can take the scale, by the way, and see how you're doing. So that's the first answer. The more important answer is this is an experience that many, many people are having because there are no boundaries now. The days roll into one another. You know, today, it's like, what's today? Is it this day or that day? And the hours just are endless and people are pulling on you. So here's the number one suggestion is you have to create boundaries. They can be small. It can be as much as saying to young children or a parent, I need to go into my room for the next 15 minutes and close the door, or I need to go out, take a walk for 10 minutes. They can be very small, but you need to have separations in the day a few times so that you can recenter, you can breathe, you can rest, you can meditate, you can do whatever you do to help you then go back and replenish and pay attention to someone and be present. That's the simplest answer or response.
Larry, do you have anything to add on that one?
I would just kind of echo that in one sense of, you know, I go back to the structure piece. You know, if you feel like, okay, I get up and, you know, I've got to deal, you know, whatever your situation in siblings or schoolwork or parents or online stuff, but if you're just kind of randomly going through the day, you're going to be wasted at the end of the day. And so I think developing some structure, building in those away times and me times, developing some structure that says, okay, you know what? I'm going to do this just for my enjoyment. You know, I like to read books, so I'm going to spend an hour in my room just reading, or outside on the porch or whatever. So develop those structures, develop those times where you're doing something for yourself that you enjoy in times of rest, and I think you'll get through it. You know, life gets crazy sometimes. It's pretty unique now, but we've all had, you know, when you've lived a few years, you will find there's a lot of crazy times. You just have to bring that structure, that rest, and those things that you enjoy together to keep yourself sane.
So something I wanted to ask was also, sorry, one second. Sort of to follow up on that, is that, and so there's another question here that I really liked, but first I wanted to go back to something that Carol mentioned to both Larry and I before the event, which was a little bit about reactivity versus like adaptive qualities in leaders and that sort of thing. I was wondering if you could, I really enjoyed when you talked about that. And I thought it was really interesting because I think a lot of students right now are feeling pressure in part to be reactive. They're seeing maybe their peers go out and build some sort of thing that's going to save the world from COVID, and then that kid's going to stick it on their resume, and maybe they're feeling some sort of like external pressure. So to the students who are feeling sort of that sort of a pressure, what would, I guess both of you, Larry, you can hop on this as well, what would you say to students who are seeing their peers sort of come around and come up with all this stuff that's all publicized, and they're feeling that pressure to come up with some sort of cure-all? Meanwhile, they're also trying to balance all this extra time which they could now spend with family or investing into relationship.
Yes.
And it sort of seems like it's like almost like a moral conundrum for some.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing I'm going to say is that any suggestion or solution that I've put forward today, and I think I'm talking for Larry too, which is dangerous because I can't talk for him because we're not even in the same room. There's no one recipe for anything. This is it's like a kit bag. It's like you're building a backpack or a kit bag of tools. So what I'm about to say has to be put in context of that. First of all, you will always face people around you who are climbing mountains, and you're walking over boulders, you're walking over stones. In other words, there will, most of you are highly competitive to begin with. And no matter where you are, you're going to be working with people who are doing more, doing better, achieving faster, are brighter than you. And this is a humbling experience. So that that inner competition that you have, this is a really good time to start practicing with taming it, not getting rid of it, but putting it in perspective that yes, some of your friends are going to build an app. Very few of them are going to make billions. Maybe one will, and some will meet some interesting people, and that may not be your path right now, but what are you going to be doing next year that they're not doing? And that's life. That's not COVID. You're just seeing it more acutely right now. I want to go back to something I actually said earlier. When you start to see your friends doing what you think is amazing and you're feeling less than, or should I be doing this or that? I was talking to you before about your head. This is a really good time to start becoming aware of, okay, what am I plugging in my head right now? Oh, I'm plugging in my head that I should be doing A, B, and C. I don't have the motivation that my buddy has. And that's the follow-on to that is, all right, let me put some perspective around this. And what am I doing? And what am I working on? And what do I feel good about, even if it's small? Because you're in a marathon, you're not in a sprint. And so some of this is just believing, having faith that what you see right now over 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, that's not life. That's just a period of time.
Larry, any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, you know, I get back to that last comment. This is an interesting period of time, but it is a period of time. And so this is not going to make or break any of us in terms of what our future looks like 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So I think having that perspective, even though it's kind of crazy right now and everybody's kind of, you know, and frankly, I'd say stay off social media and the news because they just amplify all this stuff. But you know, recognize that this is not going to be a big deal in terms of my opinion, your personal goals in life 5 or 10 years from now. Okay, somebody does a great thing over here and you didn't. But I go back to, okay, what do you want out of life? Is it truly just always climbing the corporate ladder and being successful and doing those things? Or is it about relationships? Is it about friends? Is it about enjoying what I'm doing? Those are fundamental questions that as you kind of shape what your life is all about, I think you have to have in the back of your mind is, and people bloom late. I mean, people that we hire that don't come out of the best Ivy League schools, and they may not have had the best GPA, and they become incredible scientists or engineers 10 years down the road, and they're doing amazing things. So please don't get hung up right now on this particular situation, and then think, what is it that I really want out of life? What brings me joy? And a big part of that is relationships and enjoying those around you.
So I'd like to piggyback on Larry's comments, because what he has just said is probably one of the most important messages of the whole evening so far. And that is, as human beings, we're social animals. And what we need more than anything are good relationships in our lives. That's what we're wired for. We'd like to think we're so sophisticated, but we're really a lot like the cave people way back when. That's what will carry you through life and through good times and bad times. And at the risk of sounding dour, there are going to be plenty of bad times ahead of you, and there'll be more good times. So this is practice. This is like a practice run. And when you go and you're working in a job someday, whether it's 6 months from now, a year, 2 years, it doesn't matter. Let's say you're in consulting, or you have joined JPL or some other company, and let's say you're working 100 hours a week. You're going to be that person who says, I have no time for relationships. I can't, I'm so stressed. I'm so tired. So right now, it's understandable that at a young age, there's a sense of impatience, like I got to do this now. Understandable, that's normal. And this is great practice for you to start building your whole life, not just one aspect of your life. So I wanted to comment on that because Larry's point is so very critical.
Yeah, terrific. We have another question from the Q&A, which is maybe a little bit more practical, but an anonymous viewer asks us, how would you recommend making the best of extended period of time, that is this summer with no work and a canceled internship? I don't know.
I'll start. I'll go back to, be a lifelong learner. I mean, I think this is a great time to think about, what do I want to learn? An example here in my house, my wife learned to play the piano when she was a kid. She felt like she was never good at it. So she went online, found this lady who produced books for adults on how to play the piano. And now she's learning again. But be a learner. Take this time to, there's plenty of podcasts, there's plenty of online things you can do. So I think that's number one, maybe, just to feel like, hey, I'm doing something, I've got structure, I'm learning something. And then secondly, think about, back to the point that we just made, the relationships. Are the relationships that I can strengthen this time that are important to me that I have not had time to work at because of school and all the pressures that I've been under and so on. So 2 things for me, do some learning, build relationships. But Carol's probably got some other good ideas too.
I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna run with that. Personal story. Yesterday, I got a text from a friend of mine who asked if I would be part of a spiritual circle she was putting together, not religious, a spiritual circle. She had identified 7 women. She reached out to each one on text privately and said, I'm feeling a need to have a support group around me with good energy and helping me with things that I'm tackling. And by the end of the day, she had 7 yeses. And my point to that is there's so much that we have an opportunity to do right now and to be that is going to go away before you know it. So you have a summer. And by the way, I have a son who's a millennial. So some of this I'm very, very familiar with personally. So you have a summer and you don't have structure. Going back to what Larry said, what are you curious about? Who can you help? Is there someone in your neighborhood who needs some food? If you're young and you're healthy, is there a family member who's alone or who's struggling? Can you offer something to that person once every few days? It's really as small as that, and it's also big, like learning a new skill. Or I have a friend who called me yesterday. She decided she wants to learn how to compost. So, because she's home and she has a yard, so she's learning how to compost. I mean, so there's the fun stuff. My sister just started learning how to make masks. I never knew she knew how to sew. So, we all have this stuff, and it's talking with your friends about it. Like, I'm stuck. What I need to do something. What can I do? Talk to me. It's as simple as that. And by the way, if you had an internship that went away, that implies that you have some field in which you have an interest, go online and find out what virtual conversations are happening in that area. Are there any conferences going online? I'm being bombarded with webinars that never were online. So sign up for one every week. I mean, you can add that to your repertoire so you come out of this with even deeper knowledge in your area of interest.
So one more question, I suppose, would be, this is from me and it's not from the Q&A, so I apologize for the Q&A. But for both of you, is there a really concrete example of grit or resilience that you feel it would be impactful to share with the audience, of something that you think really exemplifies grit or resilience on a deeper level?
From our personal lives?
Yeah, from either your personal life or from your experience as your personal life as a professional, either on a project or just however you want to take that question.
I'll jump in. I mean, the problem is there's so many examples. It's hard to think of all of them. So I'll just jump in with one that's top of mind. I took a job when I was, excuse me, I'm going to start this again. I took a position as an executive in a large company, a national company. And the company went through massive change while I was there. And I was part of the driver of change. Long story short, after a couple of years, the CEO was fired for political reasons, nothing to do with performance. And the CEO had brought me to the company to help change the company. So you can fill that blank in. When the CEO gets fired and you're brought in by the CEO, you're gone. So within a few months, I wasn't fired. I had a great package and they said, bye-bye. And I was on a roll. And I was really devastated because I was loving the work. The work was the toughest work I ever did in my life. And my colleague met me in the garage, the parking garage, with a box from the London shop called Pink. There's a very fancy shop called Pink. And he had a box from Pink. And he handed me the box. He had just come from London. And I said to him, "You're giving me a pink slip, aren't you?" And he said, "Yep." And he said, "I love you, but you came in with a CEO and sorry, politically, I can't save you." And I learned that was one of many, many circumstances where I had to really regroup, take time, step back, and think about where I wanted to be in my life. And I actually opted not to go back into corporate America. Long story short.
I just, for me, I go back to my life in the Air Force, and when we were in the middle of things going on in Iraq, and I was told that I was going to deploy to our Air Operations Center in the Middle East. And this was several months before my daughter was supposed to get married. And they could not tell us, how long we were going to be deployed. And my wife says, "You're going to be back for the wedding, aren't you?" And I said, "I don't know. But, this is what I've committed my life to, and therefore I have to go do this." So that's one of those things where you take it one day at a time. you get there, you do your job, you focus, and you hope and pray that you do come home in time. And you know, there's a lot of grit and resilience there, I think, when you're out there, you're doing a job, you're working 7 days a week, it's usually 16, 18 hours every day, and it just on and on and on and on and on. And yet the good news is that, you know, we finished, I got home, I got to enjoy my daughter's wedding. But, you know, that's, you really kind of see, can I do this, you know, and how's my family going to respond, and how do I keep them, you know, positive through all of this? So those are some challenging times, and they'll come in different forms and fashions, but just like Carol, I mean, there are things that get thrown at you that you just don't expect.
All right, so here's the last question for the forum. What's your advice with next simple steps for us? Walk us through a daily plan, if you have one.
I'll give you my daily plan in some sense, but first of all, have a plan, you know, when you get up in the morning. That's job one. Yeah. As I said, I think, you know, for me, it's starting off with exercise, with prayer and meditation, you know, with reading the Bible, those kind of things, to just kind of center yourself. So I would say have some practices that center yourself to start the morning. Have some things, and we've kind of talked about this, have some things you want to do that you enjoy, have some times of rest, have some times of growth, have some times of relationship, and structure your day. Don't just let it flow. But Carol, I'll let you add to that.
Well, I'm not going to add much wisdom to that, because what you're talking about are really healthy practices. For me, I'm not someone I don't like to exercise first thing in the morning. So what I've created for myself is a routine in the morning that works for me, which is I love making really good coffee, and I listen to, sometimes I listen to music. I either listen to fabulous music that I just love, or I'll listen to a webinar or something on YouTube that I've wanted to listen, someone I follow. And so having coffee, I'm feeding my dog, I'm doing that. That's my centering. And then, so I don't open my emails. I don't wake up and open my emails. It's a really bad practice to do that. So I think the message is something that gives you an oomph, a center, some joy, and then the rest is what Larry said. You must build in and plan it. When am I going to do my exercise? When am I going to do some exercise? I have, you know, you don't want to sit at your computer from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's not healthy.
Wonderful. So I'd like to invite everyone who attended to sign up for coffee chats again. This is an amazing opportunity to get to know somebody outside of that little circle that you have right now, either your immediate family or that first FEN group that you're spending most of your time talking to, and even somebody that's of a different worldview, to maybe continue talking about how your worldview impacts your views of grit and resilience, and how you're going to attack your day, centered maybe around that worldview. But together, and myself included, I'd really love to thank both Larry and Carol again for their participation and insights tonight. There will be a recording of this Zoom forum, so we'll make sure and send a link out to everybody that attended and all those pages. But again, just want to thank you both so much for sharing some of your time and insights with us tonight.
I want to thank you and your team. This has been a sheer delight, and it's been great meeting all of you and Larry, and I hope there's at least one pearl in something I said.
And I will echo that, Quincy. Thanks for all your preparation. Thanks to Ashley and the team for just making all this happen. And thanks to all you who devoted an hour and a half to listening to two old people talk about this.
Honestly. That's exactly right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Quincy.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.